If he doesn't pursue seditious conspiracy, he will get a multi-count criminal indictment against Donald Trump for January 6th. I have no doubt about it. We've talked about this for months, but that's coming for sure.
I don't even know where to start. I mean, I am following all of the work that you are doing on a regular basis. I'm not even sure where to begin. What do you think? Is it the Oath Keepers trial and what went on there? What do you think is the place maybe where we need to start this conversation?
I mean, I think the Oath Keepers sentencing is a good one. But look, just overall, Steve, this DOJ and Matthew Graves, the DC U.S. Attorney, are setting extremely dangerous legal and judicial precedents to criminalize and punish political dissent. That is the entire pretext premise of the January 6th, what Matthew Graves calls Capitol Siege investigation. We now have a court's imprimatur on using the extremely rare charge of seditious conspiracy, a Civil War era statute that was an alternative to treason to charge those supporting the Confederacy. No American has ever been convicted of seditious conspiracy. The people who have been convicted of seditious conspiracy have been people like the Blind Sheik, who bombed the World Trade Center in 1993, killed 6 people, injured 1,000 more. That charge has been levied by Matthew Graves against nearly 24 January 6ers, none of whom brought weapons to the Capitol. I think 1 or 2 are charged with interfering with police officers. They didn't vandalize anything. They didn't break. They did everything on social media. They were charged with this simply because they went to D.C. that day to oppose Joe Biden's election. So not only do you have the court's imprimatur on using seditious conspiracy to punish political dissidents in America, now you have a judge, in this case, Judge Ahmed Maida, an Obama appointee. You'll notice, here, although Trump appointed judges and Republican judges are doing the same, going along with DOJ's request to add terrorism enhancements at sentencing, basically designating these individuals who were convicted of seditious conspiracy by a DC jury, basically designating them domestic terrorists and sentencing them accordingly. This is now the precedent that the Department of Justice has to use these same charges and sentences against people who protest a rigged election. And this is aimed right for 2024.
Julie, we're about 2.5 years since January 6th now. I mean, you're the first person I know of that really began to question that narrative, or at least ask it to explain itself. And I don't know anybody that has held more of a vigil over these various court proceedings on this issue than you have during that period of time. We've also seen video of some form of a riot that did take place, some form of an exchange that did take place with some private citizens and police who started it, what instigated it, but there was some form of an exchange. I bring all that up to ask this question. Over the course of the 2.5 years that you have covered this, what would you say is the percentage of those who are suspected of, charged with actual violent acts?
So we have data on this, Steve, and it's roughly about between 10 to 15%.
That's it.
Correct, who are charged with assaulting police officers with some sort of weapon. I don't even think it's 10% of those. Now, there are probably a few hundred charged with assaulting or interfering with law enforcement. But the video loop that you see over and over of protesters clashing and assaulting police officers, that's a very small percentage of the overall now more than 1,000 defendants who face criminal charges. Most people have been charged with low-level misdemeanors, including my personal favorite, parading in the Capitol, which nonetheless is a federal offense, and in some cases, DOJ seeking prison time for that petty offense.
I think that's an important data point, because I think that reinforces the premise of what you said a moment ago. It would be political retribution, still not, prosecutorial discernment, but par for the course politics when supporters that will never vote for you act out in a way that everyone that is somewhat reasonable can agree is lawless, and to make an example of punishing them so that you can then cynically try to label that group that votes the same way that they do as all the same. That's also the stuff of a dissolving republic, but at least that would be one form of political machination. To so target people, though, that there are not even trumped up, pardon the pun, or suspected charges of committing violence would indicate something far more sinister for moving forward, a precedent far more sinister for moving forward from the same crowd that tells us speech is violence.
That's right. So today, Steve, and people can look at my work in American Greatness, amgreatness.com, but also on Twitter, I'm devoting the entire week to the disparities between how 2020 DC rioters have been treated by this Department of Justice, including Matthew Graves, who now holds that office. The disparity between how those rioters have been handled versus January 6th protesters. And especially the charges that came down, very few federal charges, I will say, for any 2020 rioter across the country, let alone in Washington, D.C. I believe that there's probably a half a dozen. But now we have more than 1,000 January 6ers charged with federal crimes. But the sentencing disparity is huge. And I'm devoting really most of this week on Twitter to posting things that Matthew Graves are asking for. These are leftover cases because most of the charges were dropped from 2020 versus the prison time he's asking for trespassers from January 6th. But to your point, Steve, every sentencing memo comes with this caveat that, yes, this person acted independently. Yes, our legal system demands that people are not convicted of, they don't face charges or sentences, prison time because of what everyone else did. That's not the case here. Matthew Graves repeatedly makes the point that, yes, this person acted independently, but was part of a mob that attacked the Capitol, that participated in the Capitol siege, that's what he calls it, and therefore should face extrajudicial punishment because they were part of a mob he calls it, of people they didn't even know. This is the persecution of a group of political adherents, Trump supporters, Trump voters. That's never happened in American history. That's why I'm saying this is dangerous precedent-setting territory.
Since we've talked to you it's been a couple months since we last talked to you. Can you give us a personal story or anecdote of a case that you have filed that really hit you on a human level, really personally bothered, disturbed you maybe a little bit more than the average political persecution, I guess, that you're covering right now?
That's such a great question, and I appreciate it. I really have to go back to when I first started covering it, and people who were pleading guilty to obstruction, who were begging for mercy in court, nonetheless being sentenced to prison time. But I will tell you more recently, Steve, what really sort of breaks my heart is talking to the parents of the January 6th defendants. I got a call from the mom of one of the Proud Boys who was convicted of seditious conspiracy. Now, their lives have been completely destroyed. This particular individual brought no weapon, did nothing violent, did not assault police officers, convicted by a DC jury, highly biased jury of seditious conspiracy. And this defendant's mom took the time out to call me and thank me for my coverage. And I get that sort of grace from so many parents, and I think that's the part that impacts me the most personally, just how gracious they are, but also keeps motivating me because there are so few voices on the right covering this, reporting on this, and defending. You don't have to defend everything that they did, but we certainly have the responsibility to call out and expose this very dangerous precedent and this highly selective political prosecution. So I'm always grateful to you guys because you have helped cover my work on this from the very beginning when very few outlets would. So thank you as well.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, thank you for the outstanding work that you have done. What can people in our audience do?
The only thing really they can do at this point is pressure Republican members of Congress to open up a separate investigation into January 6th. We have the House Oversight. Where's
the rest of the footage that we were promised? Where's that at?
Right. I believe that most of that will be coming out we do need that footage out, but we also need to protect innocent people who are being hunted down by groups literally called the sedition hunters, who will tag someone that hasn't been charged outside the building, plaster their name all over social media and try to destroy them. So there has to be a balance there. But look, there's a lot more to this, Steve, than the video. We also have body cam footage of police officers that need to be widely spread out. We need an investigation into the 2 police departments who responded that day, DC Metro and Capitol Police. But all of this needs to be separated, I believe, from weaponization or oversight committee. There's so much there, and the American people still have so many unanswered questions that a select committee that didn't do the work that the original one did, the cover-up that committee was, and really turn this into an important truth-finding mission. Because, Steve, lives are being destroyed, the precedent is being set, but January 6th will be a top political issue for Democrats in 2024. And the longer we allow these falsehoods to fester, the more that Democrats, including Joe Biden, will have the upper hand in convincing Republicans that this was some sort of insurrection, and that everyone from Donald Trump down to Republican lawmakers should pay the price for supporting it.
What are you working on next? What's on the horizon with this story?
What's on the horizon with this story, Steve, will be the criminal indictment of Donald Trump. That's what I'm preparing for January 6th. I believe that the convictions of seditious conspiracy for both Oath Keepers, but especially the Proud Boys earlier this month, bolster Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation. And I'm sure he's going to this DC grand jury with those guilty verdicts and now the sentences, 18 years for Stuart Rhodes, connecting both of those groups to Donald Trump and possibly seeking seditious conspiracy charge against Donald Trump. If he doesn't pursue seditious conspiracy, he will get a multi-count criminal indictment against Donald Trump for January 6th. I have no doubt about it. We've talked about this for months, but that's coming for sure.
What timetable do you think that happens, Julie?
That's such a good question. I think he'll probably be indicted on the classified documents issue first, and then January 6th. So it could be sometime in June, July, August. I can't see them dragging this much longer into the fall, but who knows? They have no guardrails, Steve, this Department of Justice and Jack Smith. So they're going to announce this indictment at the most politically opportune time for the Biden regime and DOJ.
I've got about 90 seconds for this last question. Do you believe that they would attempt to charge him and indefinitely detain him as they have done so many other January 6th defendants? Do you think they would try that?
Yes, I do, unfortunately. And
which would probably lead to some kind of a Supreme Court challenge then, I'm guessing, right?
It would immediately, any ruling by a judge, and these judges are the real villains here. But there's case precedent to seek pretrial detention. That means denying bail for defendants, not just charged with seditious conspiracy, charged with obstruction of an official proceeding, which he will definitely get that count. So think about that, Steve. You could have this ruthless, bloodthirsty DOJ, this highly partisan Jack Smith, who no one's seen in 8 months, who's interrogated everyone from maids at Mar-a-Lago to Vice President Michael Pence, and seeking pretrial detention for the former president of the United States. And we have now case precedent January 6th for a judge to consent to keeping him behind bars awaiting trial.